Everybody. We welcome you all. A very warm welcome to you all. Today, our speakers and guests are Honorable Justice Pratibha Singh and Senior Advocate Anuradha Dutt. Though our honorable speakers need no introduction, but I will still take this opportunity to introduce them. Justice Pratibha Singh is the sitting judge of the Honorable High Court of Delhi. She is a law graduate from University of Law College, Bangalore. She was at first rank holder from the Bangalore University and offered the ODA SSS. It's a privileged thing from the Cambridge University during her tenure to study LLM. And during her tenure, she has done about 4,000 to 5,000 cases. And about 200 to 250 cases are reported judgments to her credit, such as Novartis, Supercassettes. The list is very, very long list. And I would like ma'am only to deal with those. And with respect to Anuradha Dutt is also 36 years of her experience, esteemed experience in the litigation and arbitration. She is also a law graduate from Delhi University and LLM from Columbia University. And she has vast experience in dealing with the arbitration, international arbitrations, dealing with the bilateral international treaties and all. So I now come to my first, these are number of cases. In fact, just now only about an hour back, she got an award, international award in her talk about it. So my first question to her is that, ma'am, would you let us know, to both my speakers is, that please share your experiences of your initial professional training, the earlier influences in your life, and the mentors and guides who have really imparted their thinking and continues to do so in your life, today's life also. Even today, they have kept so much of impact on you. And what are your individual qualities and value systems which are close to your heart and which help you to stand apart from the crowd? Over to my speakers, Honorable Justice Pratibha Singh.
Anu, you go first.
No, I want to hear you first. You have achieved more than me, so you please start.
Okay, because this topic is so, I don't know, extremely close to my heart, I can say, because this is about one's own life. So I'm speaking to all of you who are, I think, not just colleagues at the bar, but most of you are my friends from the bar. We've been in the lobby together, we've been in the canteen together, we've walked around together, enjoyed jokes together. So I think this need not be a very formal webinar, and that's what I was really hoping. Yes. It wouldn't be, unlike most webinars which we do. So I believe that, the first thing I would start by saying is about my childhood life. I lost my mother when I was very young. I was 7 years old, and my dad was remarried. And therefore, I was brought up by my grandmother and my extended family. But one thing I learned during my education, I actually wanted to become a doctor. I did science in my 11th and 12th, but my grandmother wouldn't let me go out of Bangalore. She said, relatives won't agree, you can't go out of Bangalore. So that was when the 5-year law course started. I was the first batch of the 5-year law course in Bangalore University. This was 2 years before the National Law School started. So I used to be good in debating, so I joined law. I almost fasted for 1 week because I wouldn't be becoming a doctor. I was so sad that I wasn't becoming a doctor, and I wouldn't eat. That was the level of commitment I had for medicine at that time. Anyway, so finally I was allowed to become a lawyer. And during my law studies, the first and the most important thing that I realized that as a student was getting into a professional course, never, try and seek sympathy from others because of your family circumstances or anything. It's only your hard work and your competence which matters. And therefore, when you work hard, you get your own distinctive personality, and your own distinctive merit comes to be recognized. And therefore, when I was in third year of college, I got the opportunity to represent India in the Philip C. Jessup Moot Court. And I'm sure most of the youngsters here would know what a good moot court it is. It's one of the best moot courts in the world. So I went to Chicago, then I got a scholarship to go to Cambridge. So after my LLM, this is where I think one of the most important persons in my life who made a difference. My grandmother had the greatest influence on my life. She was a businesswoman who wouldn't speak English or Hindi, spoke all the South Indian languages, but brilliantly business-minded and politically very savvy, but ran her own home and business very nicely. But one person who had a very big difference in my life was the dean of the law college. I got a job at Lipton India Limited as a management trainee to become a legal manager in Bangalore. And my grandmother was so happy. She was like, LLM ho gaya, education ho gaya. Now she will get settled. 5,000 rupees salary in MG Road office in Bangalore. Nothing else to ask for. We will get her married now. Everything was fine. So I went and gave my interview. I joined there. The first day, I then went to meet my dean in the law college. And Dr. Coutinho, I need to mention his name. He came for my oath in Delhi when I took oath. So when I met him, he called me in and I sat. He said, yes, so what's happening? You came back from Cambridge. So I told him, sir, I'm very happy. I got a job. I'm going to start as a legal management trainee. So he just kept looking at me and then said to me, you know, I don't want to see you in an AC office. I want to see you either this side or that side in a court. And that one sentence had the long-lasting impact on my life. And immediately thereafter, since I had interviewed with the law firm in Delhi, they called me for an interview again. And then I came and joined Delhi. So that's how my career in law started. I was actually not meant to be a lawyer at all. I was either meant to be working in an MNC or I was meant to be a doctor. So that's how I am. And from 92, I've been working in the Delhi High Court. And I must say, the Delhi High Court, I think, is the most accepting High Court in the country. I don't think the Bangalore High Court would have accepted me as much as Delhi High Court did. I recall when I came to Delhi, at that time, since I was, I was from a foreign university and everything, I used to wear a skirt and I used to walk into the Delhi High Court lobby. But I never felt intimidated. I never felt non-accepted. In fact, most of the elders in the bar, most of them who were men, very few women. I only remember 2 women at that time who were much older to us. One was Mrs. Chandramani Chopra and Mrs. Shamla Pappu. Both of these women were there. And I remember Shamla Pappuji would speak in Telugu and she used to feel very happy that I was a Telugu girl in Delhi High Court. But Delhi High Court is the most cosmopolitan, accepting and non-discriminatory High Court. If someone needs to know how Article 14 works in our country, the Delhi High Court is the example. It shows and leads by example. It doesn't matter from where you are. You can actually excel with your work in the Delhi High Court and do so exceedingly well. Nobody will stereotype you, oh, ye Madrasi hai, Bihari hai, UP ke hai, you Rajasthani hai, ya Bengali hai. Nobody even talks about it. Now, I'm sure if I hadn't told you that Telugu is my mother tongue, you must be thinking, yeah, she's somewhere from the south. I don't know from where she is, right? Most women wouldn't even know that. So that's how it is. I think both men and women of this High Court, we all need to pat ourselves on the back to be such an accepting High Court, both the judges and the lawyers. I think that's where I'll stop on the first question. Yes, Anu.
I really don't have such a nice story to say. I was never a debater. Yes, I was very interested in politics, etc. But I was a sports person. And I think playing sports, including till India level, that gave me a lot of confidence, because if I was not good in studies, at least I was good in something, which gave me confidence. I did law as a rebel. My entire family was in education, either history, economics, or medicine. which I was least interested, medicine, I mean. Sorry, Pratibha, but I was least interested in medicine. It's too much work. I was and I am a lazy person. So I took up law, not realizing that studying law was actually a very dry subject. I was pushed. I didn't want to go to Columbia for my LLM. My father filled my forms. I said, I don't want to go. They said, you'll be kicked out of the house. Since I had no means of earning, I went there. And I have told this in the forum earlier. I actually went for a form, journalism form, thinking that maybe that's better suited for me. But I don't know what happened, and I felt too lazy to fill it. And now, of course, once I'm back, I can't imagine doing something else. But let me say to you that just seeing the topic in perspective, a lot of people have asked me, how come you took commercial law? So let me say to you two things that when I joined the profession, I decided to become a litigator because in my house, my parents thought that a lawyer is somebody who goes to court. They thought that somebody who sits at the desk is not a lawyer. So I had to choose litigation. Now, when I joined litigation, Pratibha, with all due respect, the one thing I realized after my first day, I don't want to be a judge. Sorry, but I'm saying my personal experience I'm speaking with. I just felt at that time, please remember I was 23 odd years old when I joined. And I thought that, it looks as if two people are trying to make a fool of one independent person. But it's over the years you realize that no, there is no alternate system. So this is the best system. But let me also say to you, I have put in actually, I think 38 years. I enrolled in 82 October. If you people think that I'm successful and you're calling me here to speak because I'm successful, let me say to you with all honesty, anybody can be successful. One thing you must remember in life, that the first 5-6 years are very critical. Somebody had told me at one time that all the law you learn is really till 30-32. After that, you only build on it. So I was very conscious of that. And I joined Khaitan and Company. And my senior, who had the biggest influence, because when I joined, I really, as I said to you, I was not really knowing why I'm in this profession. But T.K. Ganju, who's now a senior advocate, he was my senior in Khaitan and Company. That time, Khaitan and Company was one, not broken as now it is. And he told me, he said, are you here just to pass time before you get married? Or are you really serious about this profession? I said, I don't know if I'm serious about the profession, but I want to learn. Yes, I'm not here to pass time. And thereafter, he gave me a lot of work. I did a lot of reading. I read up Oger's Law of Pleading. He used to call me master in pressy writing. So he used to make fun of me. So to get out of that, I read Oger's Law of Pleadings and I read Moga Law of Pleadings cover to cover in my first year of the profession. And then I read Sale of Goods Act, I read Contract Act, I read these 4-5 commercial law books, cover to cover. And because I was trained in this field, I could show, I don't know whether that's the right word, but I was able to become a decent lawyer. And when I was given an opportunity to argue, etc., in courts, which unfortunately I'm not doing so much now, But in the beginning, when I was arguing, I argued against Mr. Kapil Sibal, Mr. Nariman, Mr. Venugopal, all these lawyers who are doyens in this. I was able to show my own thought process, my craft, my arguments, which, you know, if anybody is true to what they like and what they're trained in, you can then show your capability, and that's how clients come to you. I mean, I really till today don't know how to do networking. I still work a lot, maybe not as hard as the judges do today. I know about Pratibha, I know about Vibhu, I know how many hours they put in. So I'm not even today putting in that kind of hours, but I do still work. So therefore, for the young lawyers, I would say, choose what interests you. Read, because this profession requires a lot of reading in your, you know, younger days. And once you are able to do that and imbibe these values, learn from seniors around, there is no way you will be stopped in this profession from moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu and Judge. So the hard work, competence, seriousness, reading, dedication really is very, very important for one to be a successful lawyer. So just tell me, were any challenges faced by you in the legal profession, and how did you deal with this? Have to work twice as hard to prove themselves in order to achieve assignments, opportunities, and positions. So the Honorable Judge.
I have a very small presentation which I've made for all of you today, because I know that you know, it's one gets tired of hearing us speak, you know. So I think I put my thoughts together as to what makes the difference between dealing with commercial and non-commercial litigation, and what are the challenges that women lawyers face in commercial litigation. So I'm going to, with the permission of Kajal and Geetika and all of you, I'm going to share that presentation today so that all of you can see what I feel. And I think when you see it on the screen, it will make a difference. I'm going to take this opportunity to present this presentation for you. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. So here we go. I'm going to try and cover it as quickly as I can so that you can get whatever I feel were the challenges in commercial litigation. So what's the first and the most important thing in commercial and non-commercial litigation and the difference? You have a very extremely competitive environment. The clientele is extremely conscious. It is not like the late relative or the client you get in a property dispute. Here you are dealing with clientele who've dealt with the best in the country or in the world. And so they are extremely competitive and quality conscious. The time consciousness is very, very high because the turnaround time they expect is very quick. So if you're not able to give a turnaround time which is quick, they expect an opinion in like 5 hours, 6 hours by tomorrow morning. So you need to be able to give a turnaround time and live up to their demands. So this is the first and the most important thing in commercial litigation. In commercial litigation, a single mistake, a small mistake can have very serious consequences. Personal relationship wouldn't matter. It is very cutthroat. Continuous and consistency in performance. You win 10 cases, but you lose 1 case for a mistake, you may lose the client. So the consistency of performance is very, very important. You cannot make excuses with them. Even if your child is unwell, you should be able to say, okay, I'll still work from home and I'll still deliver. You may have to cut down on your sleep, but in a commercial litigation, you should be able to deliver. You can also not say, you know, if you have an individual client, you can always say, junior se galti ho gaya, munshi se galti ho gaya. but a commercial litigant will not listen to this. You are expected to be computer savvy. Managing emails and response times, I'm sure Anu will say the same thing. At one point of time when I used to run my law firm, I keep telling people I used to respond to almost 100 emails every day. I'm delegating emails. So you have to be very, very computer savvy. Your time management has to be very smart. There are times when one has to handle a conference call at 7 in the morning because there's an Australian client and an American client, and you're trying to find a time in between the two of them, which is good for all three of them. You should take a video call at 10 in the night. You should be ready for both of these. You have to be able to smartly delegate your work. If you don't delegate, women cannot handle work, because the more you keep the work to yourself, you'll be burdening yourself so much that you'll get frustrated. So delegation of work is very important. Please make sure that you delegate and supervise. Supervision plus delegation is crucial. And one thing I've realized is, apart from knowing the client himself, you need to know of their general business, of their litigations that's going on. So you need to be up to date with the general knowledge about the client. And for that, reading is very essential. You have to be available 24 hours. I recall, I must tell this because you want anecdotes. I recall there was a very major Pepsi versus Coca-Cola litigation, which was going on in the Delhi High Court. This was early 2000s, where I had briefed Mr. Sibal, and the appeal was being listed on a particular Tuesday. I had to travel to New Zealand to present a paper, but the client insisted that I have to be back even for the hearing where the other side was arguing. So I went to stay in Wellington just for 24 hours. This is almost 15 years ago I'm talking about. So even this kind of compromise you have to make for a corporate client. I also recall during a summer holiday, when we were in Shimla, we were in a valley and I had to take a con call for 1 hour because there was an agreement which was being signed. So that's the kind of commitment you need to show to a client. You should be willing to cancel your holidays. You have to be ready to work on weekends and even do overnight filings. This, I'm sure everybody has spoken, and I think Jyoti was also here in one of your seminars. Women wear several hats. It's a big balance between work and home. Daughter, wife, mother, in-laws, friends. You hardly get me time for women. Sometimes you don't even get enough time to go even to the parlor. But that doesn't matter. You still have to get on with your work. And the biggest problem I find for girls is that whenever I've had girl juniors, a large number of them, after they worked for me for even 2 or 3 years, I've in fact had parents come up to me and say, please try and see if she can get a job in some MNC because we can't find a groom for her. So this situation, I'm not sure, I'm hoping it doesn't exist today. Litigation lawyers, especially women, find it very hard to get married. And their parents get very, very stressed because of this. I can actually remember at least 10 or 15 girls who were working with me who had to move out of litigation because of this. What is the challenge in getting corporate clients? And I think the biggest challenge in getting corporate clients is networking with general counsels or legal managers, which is what I think Anu also just mentioned. If women have a big problem in networking, we can't go for a beer, we can't go for a smoke with the men. We can't go out with them for dinners very late. There is nothing that you can do over a drink in a pub with them. So there is a very tough balance that women have to maintain of being decent on the one hand and over-friendly on the other. When do you step the line? And generally, general counsels have this perception that women can't handle numbers. And I think Anuradha may be the only exception who can handle a tax matter in such a big way, being a woman.
Without reading tax as a subject, by the way.
I feel men do feel that women can't handle very big numbers matters. And women can't run around a lot because of various reasons. They can't run around in the evenings, in the mornings, etc. There's also self-hesitation that women have. Men can get work from friendship, but women can't. So we have to prove ourselves first. If they've heard of you, general counsels are much approachable. Otherwise, they can be very resistant to women. You know, another thing I've realized is when clients go to 2 or 3 lawyers while they are deciding whom they want to engage as the counsel, your colleagues at the bar can make very slight remarks. They can say, oh, she has children, or she's pregnant, I'm not sure if she'll be able to handle it. It can be a very subtle kind of thing, but that does exist. So you'll have to beat that perception as well. So in a law firm, for example, if you have a male boss, you have to give 120%. And judges and opposing lawyers can be either encouraging, they can also be patronizing, they can also be chauvinistic. And in negotiations, women can be shouted down easily. And the thin line between a woman being aggressive and assertive versus cantankerous and unfeminine, it is very, very thin. You will have to really walk a tightrope over here. Because to not be called cantankerous is very important, but it's also important to be assertive and firm. How do you walk this thin line? Women have to find their own ways. You know, it is very strange. I've had lawyers who've come up to me and said, because I used to have many girl juniors, but at most points of time, it was at least 50-50 boys and girls. But the girls tended to stick together with me when I was in the lobby of the High Court. So a couple of men, in fact, have come and asked me, oh, should we be girls to be your juniors? So there is a kind of stereotyping of women. Or in the Cambridge scholarships in the first 2-3 years when only girls got it, I had a boy who walked up to me and said, ma'am, you give scholarship only to girls. So that's the thing. If I was giving it only to boys, nobody would have said it. Now in the last 2 or 3 years, there are boys who've got the scholarship. So stereotyping becomes very easily. So what do you think women should do? I feel competence beats everything. If one is hardworking and competent, women take lesser time for achieving more and better results. Perception is changing with the entry of women GCs. General counsels are becoming women. Women general counsels are quite common, at least 30-70% is there now. If you have an office and home together, even if it's small way, even in a small way, the kids are able to see you. You can also supervise your domestic course and you can balance your work. One of the most important things that women don't do well is marketing themselves. You know, you don't have to overdo it, but your competence should be showcased. Please showcase it. Don't feel hesitant to showcase your competence. Being clever. You should know when to be hard and when to be soft. Hard touch versus soft touch. And pick your battles. There's no need. You can ignore most of the things with a smile. And so don't always pick a battle with everything. Women ought to support each other, I feel. And having brought up children in a joint family, I believe that from childhood, it's important to make the children very independent while being available. So my children would enter any conference which I was having in my office. It was an open office. Children never had any hesitation. So being accessible is more important than doing their work for them. Make them independent, but be accessible. And I think most women can achieve a lot by having a smile on their face. Obtaining good education is very important. One important thing is, I think women should read more business newspapers. Don't read just the normal newspapers. Reading business newspapers makes you very commercially savvy and aware. Whenever a client comes to you, a commercial client, if you know, for example, last week, they have received a big investment or they've entered into a big arbitration problem, but they've come to me for an IP matter. The fact that I would even mention it or even say, oh, it's very excellent, I saw that you're getting a new investment in your company. So they know that you're very conscious and you're conscious about what's happening around you. So reading business newspapers can be a very big tip, which I would give to most of the women lawyers. I remember, for example, when I used to brief a senior who was a little far away from my home, I would take my daughter or my son in the car, make them do the homework. Even during the conference, when the seniors make you wait, the children being with you, they become more trained and you get to give them attention as well. And always it's good to keep a driver. So don't be, what I would say, hesitant to keep a driver. You can spend a lot of time in the car on your emails or even talking to your children or talking to your relatives, but it's worthwhile keeping a driver. So those smaller expenses of having a cook at home, of having a proper maid at home, having a driver, you may spend 20, 30,000 or 40,000, but it's worth it. You can definitely spend that time much better. It doesn't mean you can't do that job. Then, most important, dress professionally, no frivolity. I remember there was a girl in the court one day who was wearing long earrings and the judge ticked her off. And I think that the lawyer felt very bad. But you know, the point is, we have to operate in the ecosystem that we do have. And I recall very clearly when there was a judge in the Delhi High Court who used very bad language with me. I went up to the Chief Justice and I, complained about it. And when we chat, I can even tell you the entire story about it. So never seek sympathy or pity. Drop the victim mentality. Don't ask for sympathy. Even in court, if you need an adjournment, there's no need to say what is the reason or anything. You can just make it as a personal difficulty and then leave the court. I think one more important thing in my career, which has played an important role, is to have good relations with the extended family. The joint family is one of the biggest support system for women. And if we are a little more compromising and a little more adjusting, the joint family system can help us, not just in giving us happiness, but also in building our careers in a very big way. Your relatives should be able to reach out to you. Then you build a much better ecosystem for yourself in the house. We should all focus on our fitness. It's important to walk. It's important to do yoga or something even 20 minutes a day or at least 5 times a week is very important. I think after all these challenges, judges are more understanding today. Clients realize that women can have a lot of commitment. Senior counsels are willing to accommodate if you tell them, I need a time at 6 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock. The staff, at least in our High Court, is extremely good to women and girls. I've never faced a problem with the staff. And there are much more women of late in courts. And once you gain the trust of a client, they don't leave. They too go the extra mile and they do understand in situations when you're in a problem. I think these statistics are well known. When I joined, there was just 1 lady senior in the High Court. Then there were 7 lady senior advocates. Same in the Supreme Court, the numbers are increasing. The future is promising. The barriers have actually been broken. And I think in the next 15 to 20 years, we will really see a large number of women entering the higher echelons of the legal profession and the judiciary. And there was one question which was here, which I really think Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, recently when I saw her video, there was a question in your questionnaire which said, when do you think we will see a Harish Salve or a Manu Singhvi or more judges in the Supreme Court? So I want you to hear this 1-minute clip of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's very, very interesting.
Finally tonight, our NewsHour shares of the day, something that caught our eye that might be of interest to you too. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg spoke at Georgetown University here in Washington yesterday about what it's like to be one of only a handful of women who served on the Supreme Court. Along the way, she also provided rare, candid insight into the career challenges she overcame to get to the pinnacle of her profession. Here is some of what she had to say.
In the ancient days when I was going to college, the law was not a welcoming profession for women. In those days in the Southern District, most judges wouldn't hire women. In the U.S. Attorney's Office, women were strictly forbidden. In the criminal division, there was 1 woman in the civil division. And the excuse for not hiring women in the criminal division was they have to deal with all these tough types. And women aren't up to that. And I was amazed. I said, have you seen the lawyers at Legal Aid who are representing these tough types? They are women. People ask me sometimes, when do you think it will be enough? When will there be enough women on the court? And my answer is, when there are 9. If I had any talent in the world, any talent that God could give me.
So, Justice Ginsburg, when asked as to when will there be enough women in the court, she said when there are 9. And there are 9 US Supreme Court judges. So I think, friends, paying homage to this great soul, Justice Ginsburg, who didn't get a job in a law firm in New York. When she topped Columbia, we've come a long way as women lawyers and judges. And I think the turnaround is just around the corner, maybe 15 to 20 years, not more. I think when we see women judges in the judiciary, on the committee for lower judiciary examinations, etc., I go there very often. We are involved in the paper setting, etc. And you'll be surprised to see that at the lower judiciary in Delhi, more than 50% of the incoming talent is women. So I would like to end with that note.
Thank you.
So ma'am, a question with respect to what you've just now said. The question is, do you think that the Indian legal system is more committed to the concept of giving diversity the focus and the emphasis rather than equality?
I don't think we should call it either diversity or equality. I think we should just say recognize competence. Women should be there not because they're women, but because they're competent professionals. And the minute we speak of competence and women, that's when we will get the traction. Because the minute you keep saying, there are 5 members in this list, at least it should be women. No, there could be 5. If you could have 5 men, why not 5 women? That's what I would say. We should have more and more competent women in the profession so that at some point there will be a stage like in the lower judiciary, in the entry-level judiciary. We do not take the women because they are women today, or the girls. They come out from the national law schools, they come out from the universities. They come, they compete with the examination, they compete in interviews. They're taken because they are good. So it doesn't matter. I think we should stop saying equality, diversity. We should actually say professionalism and competence. That's what I think.
Thank you, ma'am. So the other question with respect to you, very, very illustrious in, your groundbreaking judgments on pharmaceutical, plant variety, and your patent and copyright specialization. What we wanted to know was, what was that particular breakthrough, case that you still remember, which you thought, that actually helped you transcend, like jump a level and become more you as people know today?
I think if I look back if you say about what was like a defining moment in that sense, I think there were 2 defining moments. The first defining moment was when in the Delhi High Court, when I was arguing matters, when I had briefed seniors. This is I'm saying it in a general way rather than a particular moment way. Of course, I have briefed Mr. Salve, Mr. Jaitley, Mr. Kapil Sibal, almost all the top seniors in our country. But the defining moments in my profession came when, for example, they had got delayed in court and I was arguing in the court, and when they came and sat next to me. So it's those men, all of those men who recognize competency, including the judges, who then permit you to just argue without even calling upon the senior. And I think those 4, 5, 10 cases which made the difference in my life, when litigants are sitting at the back, the senior is sitting next to you, and then you are arguing the matter. That makes you feel, okay, they do have confidence in women. The second and the most defining moment was as a solicitor, when I won the Novartis case. I felt that was my high day as a solicitor. On that day, I decided that I should move on to become a senior. This was in April 2013. I was designated in December 2013. So I applied immediately once we won the Novartis case that it's not going to get any bigger than the Novartis case in IP law in India. And I said I should move on. That's my view of this.
I have a similar question for Anu ma'am. Anu ma'am, what is your breakthrough litigation? Is the Vodafone matters what completely changed things for you? You broke the glass ceiling, you caused all that disruption, it was the biggest legal case, that happened in the Indian legal scene.
I'm not sure that's what we should be looking for as far as I'm concerned. I I view what women in law are as where our society is. So when I joined in 1982, October, I joined the bar. At that time, there were maybe 10, 15 women lawyers. Our society still did not permit women to, come out and do a lot of what is called, without being rude, I felt at that time when I saw that women were mostly in employment or family law. So they had broken through till there. But I think the society was accepting that much only. I think from 82 to now to 90s, I would say, I'm not crediting one particular case because I'm not made of one case. I'm made from where I started. So when I started, my aim was to earn 2,500 so that I could contribute to my house. My parents had retired. They were both professors. And I wanted 2,000 rupees so that I could give them, and 500 I could spend on myself. So that's where, my thought process started. And I started on my own. And let me say to you that I think in the 90s, the society has evolved more. In the 2000s, the society has developed more. The problems that women had in 80s, that once you got married, you could not then work late hours. These are issues which have to some extent broken down. And that's how women in commercial matters have become success. In fact, what Pratibha J put down, it's her experience. And I do agree. Some things I may not agree because that's her personal experience. That's not my experience. But if I am today going to tell you that this is one case which made me, that's not true. I think what made me was my initial years, and where, as I said to you, like T.K. Ganju, he said, he forced me to get out of Khaitan Company. He said, you're not made to be a junior here. You have to start on your own. Then I met Mr. P.V. Kapoor, who gave me the first break. Then I met Harish Salve. Then I met K.K. Venugopal, Dr. Shankar Ghosh. These are my defining moments and not a particular case. So as I said to you, if you work hard, and let me take a break and tell you, I've never faced any gender issue in the High Court. I've never had a judge say something which he would not say to a male junior or a male lawyer. I've never had a client say anything except a woman. A friend of mine said, please go to a women IAS officer's house and meet her. She has some house issues. I said, I don't go to people's houses. She said, for my sake. So for my friend's sake, I went to her house. And before I could reach office, she had called my office and asked if there is a male partner. So that's the only gender discrimination that I've seen till today. That's from a woman. But that is because that's how our society is. Daughter-in-law, mother, has a problem, then mother-in-law, she makes the same problems. These are issues. So as our society is developing, according to me, we are breaking all glass ceilings, not because of one case, but because I think our society is evolving. The other day, I heard on your panel discussion that, even in America, of course, even in America, because it's the same society, our society is patriarchal. So you will face these hurdles, but you have to, as I said earlier, you have to just concentrate on being a good lawyer. As you can see, Pratibha is so conscientious that she has put together and I am not. She's put together something, I'm only speaking orally. So we are two different personalities, but both are successful. So, you know, you have to be good at your work. That's all that matters. Everything else, I mean, unfortunately, we live in a patriarchal society, so we have to deal with these issues. Everyone will deal with their own issue at a particular time. But that's my only thing, that please do not think that Vodafone made me. I was a good lawyer and I had clients. Why did Vodafone come to me? It's not because somebody referred it to me. Vodafone saw me, and that's how they came to me. And then I advised them to go to XYZ seniors. So, you know, if you want me to say what's a defining moment, I think the defining moment is when I became an independent lawyer. I had the courage. I used to, Lakshmi Menon, her father used to get up from his office. I used to sit after 6 o'clock. That's where I started. 2,500 was my aim, but I kept working. And as I said to you, if I, who's absolutely unorganized person like Pratibha, if I can, what you think is a success, any of you can do it. You just have to ensure that you work hard. Commercial matters or family matters or any other matter, it's the same. You have to just work a lot, and there is no substitute for reading, unfortunately, in this profession, which I came to know once I joined it. I would never have taken it if I'd known that, because as I said, I'm an extremely lazy person. But so, you know, yes, I'm not going to say Vodafone was not an important case, but I had done important matters before that. I had done MS Shoes, which was a very high profile matter. And so what I liked about all these commercial litigations was that nobody said, you are a woman, you have a small team, we won't. Let me tell you, in Vodafone, there were lots of lawyers. In MS Shoes, there were lots of pitches to clients. But because you were good, they came to you. And you showed in court, out of court, that you have that patience and that, you know, tenacity to get their work done well. They stick to you. Unlike Pratibha's experience, let me say to you, I had a client called Indian Metal Ferroalloys. They had a very big litigation, which they succeeded in High Court, but they lost in Supreme Court. In fact, it's one of the leading judgments in bank guarantee law. Svenska Handelsbanken. I lost. But I still remember Dr. Panda, who was the managing director of the company, called me to Odisha and said, I know we've lost, but I am so impressed with the hard work you people put in. I will open an office for you here, Anu. Please also have, I'm not saying leave Delhi. So it's not just success or losing which matters. What matters to a client is whether you are putting in the hard work, putting in your best foot forward. And that's what ultimately pays off. Whether you are a boy, whether you are a girl, doesn't matter. So let me give my example. In 1987, when I was not getting 2,500, I went and started my own work. It was Baba Kapoor, PV Kapoor, who said, yes, I think you're a very good lawyer. I will get you a retainership of 2,000 rupees from a commercial client. And I said, okay, 500 rupees I can earn by myself. So that's, you know, why did Baba Kapoor? It's not that I was related to him, but he saw that I worked well when I was in Khaitan Company, and I came out. So for me, that was a defining moment. Then Lakshmi and I started in 87, a firm called Datan Menon. Let me tell you, there were so many people who said, oh, women law firm, never will succeed. Never. And for first 6 months, I was very disheartened because everybody was saying, except a few people like Ganju, who said, hang in there, Baba Kapoor, hang in there, don't worry. And that's the defining moment. These are people, Venugopal, Harish, they came forward, appreciated your work, and, gave you a confidence to start a firm. Thereafter, in 2007, Farishte Setna, who was a very dear friend, who had a firm in Bombay, so we, started a firm together, Dutt, Menon and Dunmore Set. Dunmore Set was Farishte Setna. In 2012, in fact, what Vodafone did was that we sat down and said, we are for gender equality. We are not only for women. So it's a wrong thing we are doing. And then we opened. Rashi Dheer was our first male partner who, without whom I would say that I wouldn't be here talking to you, because he's really contributed to our growth. And now we have, I think, 6 or 7 male partners, and we are 4 women partners, including Ekta. So my life's essence till now is, whether it's corporate or it's non-corporate, it's your hard work that matters. Once you are sincere to your work, there is no stopping you. Yes, there is an issue of networking. I don't deny that. It is, we as women ourselves have a hesitation because we are in a patriarchal society, and what will so-and-so say? But if we can break that, and today I'm seeing that young lawyers are breaking. Even in my firm, there are women lawyers who are breaking this and going out and meeting. And I think as our society progresses and evolves, I think these notions will also go away. That, women can't party, women can't entertain. And as I said to you, it's all evolving our society, fighting with our society, fighting against patriarchy. That's what we need to do. We don't have to say we are women, so we are this. We don't have to work double hard. Sorry, that's not been my case. I've worked like any other lawyer did, but I was honest and true to my work. I think that's how I have been able to bring this firm and myself where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the answer, for all the inspiration. There is just one more question. Do you think women make good leaders? Do you think that women, when they lead with male energy, because that's quite the norm,
The problem is that you are going on comparing it to male energy. I'm not following this. You are asking me, you are asking a woman who's leading a law firm of 100 plus people in it, you're asking her, will women make good leaders? I think that's what I said. It's all in her brain.
No. So you are the leader and you have to tell. The idea is that...
But I am not. That's what I said in the beginning, Gitika. I'm not an exception. I am an extremely lazy person who shirks responsibility, and that's why one of the reasons why I neither married nor adopted. My parents really tried their best to ask me to adopt. I said, who'll take this responsibility? So all I'm trying to tell you is women are men are equally good. Both have to work hard. There is no, in this profession, there is no other option except to work hard, whether it's a man or a woman. Yes, because we are a patriarchy society, men have that lead. But I don't think if a woman tries hard, she will lag behind. And if you are asking me why there are not so many women seniors and judges.
Women senior, women judges, women.
So let me say to you, women judges, I totally agree with Pratibha. As our society is evolving and as, women shatter more glass ceilings. And in your own house, if you are able to see that a boy, if you can give the same training to a boy and a girl, and if a boy cries, don't say, ye to aurton wali kaam hai. When you stop talking like that, thinking like that, bring up your children equally, give them the same platform, you will have the same. And today, women seniors, I do feel we have good, I mean, let me say to you, Indira Jaising is one senior I have worked on commercial matters. She is brilliant. But she has chosen. See, everybody makes a choice. Pratibha made a choice to do IPR. I made a choice to do whatever comes by my way, and that was commercial. Actually, I have hardly ever got any family matter. And so, you know, that's how you'll evolve. So if you do, if Indira Jaising had taken to commercial matters, she would have done brilliantly, because I have actually won a matter against Tatas with her points, and her also there in the matter. So, but she chose to be an activist, apart from being a lawyer. So, you know, that's her choice. My choice, unfortunately, has been commercial law. Pratibha's choice has been commercial law, IPR law. We have not chosen to be activists. That's not something to criticize Indu or to criticize us. So whatever you choose, be true to that. Work hard, you will be there. If there are no women seniors at the moment at top, it's for women to be criticized, because we don't. Let me tell you, I got a choice to be a judge or to be a senior. I declined both because I thought this is too much hard work. I mean, initially I thought something, but by the time I was in 40s, I did get choice of both, but I was just too lazy. So, you know, it's not that women lawyers are not getting their share. If you are hardworking, true to your skill, you will make it. I have no doubt in my mind that in the coming years, seniors will be as good, but they must rise up to that skill. You know, to say Harish Salve or Abhishek Singhvi, I mean, they have really worked hard. I remember Harish getting up at 5 o'clock, sleeping at 11, 12, getting up at 5. How many of us, I don't do it. So I don't know how many women seniors are doing that. So you have to really work hard. Pratibha could have been one fantastic senior, but she chose judgeship. What can we do? So, you know, it'll be there. There'll be other Pratibhas who will come forward and choose to be a senior. You have to work hard. You are as good. You just have to concentrate on your skill. That's all I have to say.
So just one more issue. Do we not think something that should be done with respect to underrepresentation of women in higher judiciary? Is it something that you think that, you know, I mean, we're 70 years down and we don't have the first woman chief justice till now. We have barely 2 women. And is no case made out, you know, for lobbying more or for lobbying for more representation in the higher judiciary? I think Pratibha was shying away from it, but I think that she should say something, you know.
So to my mind, before Pratibha answers you, I think it's not as if there has to be a quota. But what I think is there are many brilliant women jurists, very bright and sharp. They must come up, and therefore I do agree that we need more women judges. Pratibha, please. I hope Pratibha goes to Supreme Court.
After Anu's ballistic speech, I don't know if I need to say anything. She's been absolutely ballistic. It's so wonderful. I'm again feeling like a lawyer now. In higher judiciary, I just think it will happen organically. It will not happen just because we make a case for women. We should not do that. As Anu says, we should all strive to come up to that competence and hard work level. Let me be clear. There has to be that extra 25 or 30% that women will need to be able to be recognized. There is no doubt about that. I do acknowledge that if one woman and one man are equal, then normally the man would take it. But if the woman is about 20% better, then the woman takes it, right? So we should always try and strive harder to be slightly better, but that's again in our own hands. And I don't think in the last 5 or 10 years, I've really felt that our judicial system is not in favor of women, because I remember Justice Kaul in the canteen when he spoke. He's got 2 lovely daughters, and he said one of the biggest duties of judges is to actually encourage the wild and the hard-working girls of this generation. So, you know, I think it's very natural, but we are much better in India. I think the society is much better than in most other societies. I recall my best friend in Cambridge, who's a lawyer in California. She had to resign from a very big law firm, move into her own small independent practice. And she always believed that it's much tougher to become a senior partner in a big law firm in the US than it is in India. And she actually is surprised at the number of women who are coming up in India. And I think today's audience and today's panel, which is in front of me itself, proves beyond any doubt that girls and boys are equal. And I don't think any of the judges in our court, at least anymore, try to discriminate, because very few judges discriminate today. And most of us are treated equally. And even within decision making, I think whenever there's a girl's name and the girl is even passing the basic competence level, judges are more accepting towards such women becoming judges. I don't think it's very far off before we see a much more higher percentage of women in the higher judiciary.
Okay, so I want to now do this one little small exercise.
I just want to ask one more question.
Yes.
There has been rise in the cases involving issues of sexual harassment. Don't you think we should have some diversity training compulsory for all who are part of this legal fraternity in order to create?
I think Kajal has raised a very important and significant issue. There are 2 dimensions to what Kajal has just said. Recently, as part of the E-Committee...
Safe space.
Oh, sorry, I thought you had stopped, Kajal, sorry.
No, I think yeah, she didn't complete it. Safe space, yeah.
So that's what I said, to have a proper...
basically develop safe space culture. That's what the question is. Whether you can use diversity training to help.
Internet connectivity. Yeah, so the way I look at it, there are 2 dimensions.
We have to create a space, safe space and a good working environment.
Some net issue.
Yes, Kajal, you're finished? I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am, I think you can continue. I think you have we've written that question for you either which way.
Okay. So
yes, I'm finished. I think some you can.
What I think is that very clearly sexual harassment and safe space issues are there. And I think your questionnaire said, is it enough to have one judgment? I don't think it is one judgment. All of us judges are very conscious of this. While we are conscious of the problems which women face, we also should be conscious of the misuse of these laws.
Exactly.
So there has to be a balance when we are looking at this. While creating safe spaces, judges and the legal system has to be conscious of misuse as well. So while maintaining the balance, I think we should sensitize right from the law judiciary and in the legal fraternity, the sensitization to these issues and the misuse and the use and the abuse, everything. I think there has to be a proper balance.
So, Pratibha, can I ask you a question? So when you are hearing a case how do you decide? Is it the law, the constitution, or the equity? Where does the balance lie? I can't hear you. You have gone on mute.
I believe that there's no equity outside law. Every equitable remedy has to be recognized in law. And there are situations when we as judges do think about, your heart is somewhere, but your brain is another place. But in those situations as judges, we have to be trained to just follow the law. Simple. The Constitution, of course, is the highest law, and then the law. So we cannot veer outside the law. Sometimes our sympathies could go haywire when we are looking at issues of, for example, women or sexual discrimination, things like that. But then you have to stick to the law. You cannot move outside the law. Whatever is within the four corners of law is what you can do. Whatever equitable remedy is available in law, you can grant that, not outside the law.
That's where actually I disagree, but because I do feel that equity should, be a bigger touchstone of justice. But glad to hear your view.
So I think so. A very small question I'm going to ask, the last question. Do you think that the women of today's women lack the seriousness and dedication despite honorable judge?
Sorry, I can't follow.
I think the question is, do the women of today lack seriousness and dedication?
Yes.
Oh my God, how can you say that? How can you even ask such a question?
At all.
In a women's lawyer forum?
I think the women of today are as you said, they are absolute firecrackers. There's no doubt about that. And I think we are drawing the best balance we can between our families and our professional lives, and we are still excelling. And that just proves that we are as competent or even better. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
To give any questions, Geetika?
Yeah, so a few quick questions, and this is something that you both can respond on at the same time. It doesn't have to be long answers. So in today's context, Anu ma'am, Pratibha ma'am, free speech or fair speech? What should be the goal?
You go first.
Okay, you have to be more circumscribed. I agree. So I think a balance of free and fair. So I would say that we are in very difficult times where free speech today is really, I think, being seen.
Over-exhausted.
It's being seen as a terrorist activity. That's my problem. I don't know if you have seen the Delhi riots. Pratibha, please shut your ears. So you don't have to comment on this. But if you see the Delhi riots charge sheet.
Yeah, you have to see like all those, ma'am, you have to see all those, channels, okay? And you have to see the extent of free speech and how, it's actually violence, I mean, that's
not free speech, yeah. That is not free speech. Free speech doesn't mean you abuse people. Yeah, that's not free speech. You can abuse the system.
That is the defense those people
You can question a system. Yeah. You should have the right to dissent, but not abuse. That is not free speech, according to me. Pratibha, please feel free to.
My answer would be res ipsa loquitur. The fact and we are talking freely proves we have free and fair speech.
But it's not necessarily always the same. It's not always fair. Free speech is not always fair speech, That's the problem.
See, one thing I must tell you. We must, whenever we talk about any particular topic, let us not be cynical about it. And I feel very, very strongly that in India, when you go to foreign countries and you travel around and you realize how much it is wonderful to be in our country, because we actually believe, please, let's not go by what the various channels or whatever say, they're not the real judges of whether we have free and fair speech or not. What we are doing today is free and fair speech, right? So do we have any inhibitions on expressing our views? I don't think so. None of us have an inhibition. None of us are scared about saying what we want to say today on any forum. And I think that's what it is. And while saying so, I just saw the chat box and there's one very interesting comment there. And I want to actually add on this and say, you know, whether it's our fathers, whether it's our family, and in my case, whether it's my husband, I think they have, or my in-laws for that matter, my mother-in-law, they've all played very, very great roles in where we are today, right? So it's not about men versus women. It's about more and more women. That's it. It's not one against the other, right?
This is also, again, just in one line, and we just wanted to know your opinion on it. What is your idea of justice? Both of you, what do you think in one line, one word? What should be the idea of justice?
My idea of justice would be if you go to the common man on the footpath and ask him, "Is case mein sahi hua ya galat hua?" वो जो आंसर देगा वो सही है.
Juries.
That is justice. अगर वो बोलेंगे सही डिसीजन था, सही फैसला था, तो वो जस्टिस है. अगर वो बोलेंगे नहीं था, क्योंकि जस्टिस आम आदमी के लिए. It's his perception, his eyes that we need to answer. And I think in the man, in the citizenry, or in the people of this country, God will reside, and that's where justice is.
Anu ma'am, quick comment?
Well, I mean, she has put it well, but to my mind, justice is a combination of constitution, laws, and equity. And a fair balance, not that you go only by law. I think equity has to play a greater role in justice.
So the next question that I want to ask is that is in matters of great public interest, you know, where public interest is involved, should public opinion have any weight? Should judges consider public opinion? Like, for example, you have a Sabrimala review where you have, you know, an issue with respect to right of menstruating women, okay, right, to pray in you know, to go pray in mosques, to go and pray in, you know, Parsi temples, of Hindu women to go in, you know, and pray in temples, right? It's a question that is going to arise before a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court in the times to come. Do you, as two women who are lawyers and leaders of the bar and senior advocates and judges, do you think that public opinion should decide? Because then the number of men in that public opinion is going to be far greater, and it's going to be a polarized issue. So do you think that it should weigh with the judges, the public opinion?
Do you want to go first? Okay. So I think what happens mostly is that judges, and Pratibha, this is not meant for you, judges do fall prey in the higher judiciary more often than not, fall prey to public perception. I'm not sure whether public opinion is right, but it's a public perception, and I will give you example of the Mandir case. Now, in the Mandir case, you know, the fact is, yes, it was a holy place for the Hindus. It was not a holy place for the Muslims. So maybe Muslims should have compromised and not gone on. But what happened? Because the popular perception was that, yes, there should be a mandir here, you got a judgment which said that demolishing the Babri Masjid was wrong, but building today a temple is right. And I have never seen that every judgment, I think, you know, any democracy names the judges who the judge who pens or somebody else who, here it looked as if they were ashamed to put their name. So I think in that case, they fell prey to public perception. It's not public opinion. You don't know, you're not doing a vote to see what the public opinion is. It's a public perception. And I think for judges to fall prey to public perception is contrary to justice. I mean, that's my opinion.
Gitika, let's see there are certain questions.
No, Pratibha ma'am is answering this question.
Okay, sorry.
Can I pass?
No, ma'am, you can't say something.
No, you have to say.
It's very important. It's a very important.
Let me.
Women, yeah, right of women to pray. You're somebody who's spiritual and religious, you know, and this is a very serious issue. This is what patriarchy is about, you know.
Okay. Speaking about the Sabrimala judgment, my own, I have kind of, if you say, I believe in the Sabrimala deity, right? So my family, my brothers, my uncle, etc., have been to Sabrimala. During my childhood, I've had, proper religious ceremonies in the house when they have gone to Sabrimala. So if you ask me as a human being, as a woman, I would not go to Sabrimala so long as I'm menstruating. However, when you decide something as a legal issue, when you decide something as a faith, these are two different things. Judges have to be only legally right. They don't have to be politically right. So according to me, public perception should not matter. We have to only, as I say, go by the law. We have to go by what is right as per our constitution. Giving a choice to the woman to decide whether she should go to a particular temple or not. If it is as per law, then that's the judgment it should be. If it is not as per law, it should not be like that. So it's up to courts to decide what should the law be and interpret the law. So I don't think faith comes into issue while deciding a case. Public opinion doesn't come into issue while deciding a case. What comes into issue is only the law, nothing else.
But what if faith is wrong? Some part of faith is wrong. Some practice which has been put together 5,000 years back, you know, which is regressive. You could have genital mutilation. You could have all those practices, you know, like, I mean, at the end of the day, we did away with triple talaq, right? The argument at that point could have been made, right, that it is somebody's religious right, and that's what is, you know, ordained by Allah. So you have where do you draw the line, basically?
So that's why I said judges decide as per law and not by faith. That's the reason I said that. As a person, I have a different view about a particular temple, but as a judge, you only go as per law. But
do you like the logic that if you're menstruating maybe 5 days a week, then you're not good to go for the rest 25 days?
Are you asking me as Pratibha as a girl or a woman, or as
a girl as a woman? I'm asking as a girl as a woman. I'm asking Pratibha as a girl as a woman. What about the non-menstruating days? That's what I'm asking.
So that's where the judgment comes in. The judgment gave the choice to women to decide if they wish to go, and they gave the choice for them to allow them to go, and it's up to the women if they want to decide if they wish to go.
I think we have some questions from the audience now. Please, anybody? Yeah.
There is first question is by, I think so, Radhika. Thank you, Pratibha ma'am and Anuradha ma'am, for sharing your personal journeys with us generously. And both of you have operated through partnership firms and LLPs. Both of you were always the face of your firm. The brand which attracted clients have been yourself. I see many GCs, however, tending to go to what are referred to as the big full service law firms. Though I personally believe that a counsel-driven practice is much better at framing strategy and delivering relief and teaching you the skills of a counsel. The draw of a big firm is usually the higher pay scales. What do you advise women who want to enter and be personally successful in counsel and commercial litigation? Should they join a counsel-driven practice or a bigger full-service firm? To the Honorable Judge.
Okay, it's a question of personal choice. Yes, I'm sure Anu and me, or for example, her own partner, etc., drove the film initially. But it's not that so long as, the lady or the woman lawyer has to decide what kind of practice he or she wants. There is nothing like right or wrong, black and white. For some people, a full service law firm is more suitable. For some people, a self practice is suitable. So for some people, counsel practice is suitable. Like I know for myself that when I started my practice, I never wanted to build a firm. It was never my idea to build a firm, but it just grew so much that it had to be made into a firm. So that's how it happened. And things do happen naturally and organically. I think we should just go with the flow. That's what I did, and that worked for me. And it depends on what Anu and others have an opinion on.
Anu?
So I'm sorry, I'm not fully clear. She's asking whether she should join a firm or so, as I said, it really depends. You have to be trained well in your skill. You can get that in a law firm. I worked in a law firm and I got my skills there. Or you can, to say firms don't do strategy is not right. At least I have always decided strategy for my matters. And, it's also opportunity. Some people get opportunity with individual lawyers. So they should seize that opportunity. Some people get with firms. So it's all about how you get the opportunity, but you just have to learn. That's all. And by the way, there have been top lawyers who never had worked for a few years. They sat in court, saw how others were arguing, strategizing in court, and that's how they learned. So, Sirvai being one of the examples. So it all depends on yourself, what opportunity you get, seize it, work hard, and make something out of that opportunity.
There is one question by Varisha. She says, do you think that the heavy senior advocate system perpetuates male dominance in the bar?
I would say yes. In fact, when I was 2-3 years in the profession, I did write that the system of senior advocates should be abolished. And you will then get better lawyers, because then the senior advocates can't do 20 matters. They'll have to concentrate on a few matters. I do think the American system is much better, where you argue your own cases and you don't have to brief counsels. To my mind, I totally agree with that. I've always believed this is a wrong system. Sorry, Pratibha, I don't know what you want to say.
Maybe we could have another quick question. Anu ma'am, are you in favor of an all-women's law firm? As
I said to you, I started in 87. Till 2012, it was only women law firm partners.
No, juniors also law. Juniors also women.
No, I am not in favor of that. I think it should be equality, and it shouldn't really be gender-based. And so I am not, let me tell you, Gitika, this is the first time I have participated in a women lawyers forum. I've never been to a girls' bar room in High Court or Supreme Court. Maybe in my 38 years, once I may have gone. That's it. So I really don't believe in this.
One last question, and this is to both of you, and it's to end on a happy note. After a long day, what is your poison? So you can say anything, chai, coffee, whatever.
Pratibha?
Get the question. What was your question?
I said, what is your poison at the end of the day?
What's your poison?
Stress buster, I think she means.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
For me, I would love to have popcorn and watch a very nice movie.
Okay, right.
Or spend time with my children, both of them.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Anu ma'am?
Yeah, I love to watch movies. I think in this lockdown, I must have watched some 200-300 movies. So I Absolutely agree. Unfortunately, popcorn I can't have. I have diabetes. So
Share the list.
I do not eat without it.
Share the list with everybody.
And talking politics with friends. That's my second hobby.
There's one interesting question which I want to put to Anu, which has come on the chat box. Anu Radha ma'am, when are you joining politics? We need good lawyers in parliament. That's what it says.
I love to talk politics. I don't want to join it. You have to be very thick-skinned to join politics. I don't have that thick skin, unfortunately.
Okay, whoever put that question, it's answered.
I think it's about time. So we'll save our rest of the questions and all the issues we have, you know, those pending issues that we have, right, for some another day. Kajal ma'am, please say thank you.
Yeah. So our special thanks to our esteemed speakers for devoting and sharing their time and wisdom with all of us. We also thank all our participants for attending and giving the seminar vitality. I also thank to our coordinating team of Mrinalini Sen, Nandita Rao, Iram, Soumya Tandon, Sunita Ojha, Ekta Kapoor for assisting all of us. And my special thanks to Mrinalini Sen, the host, who has been providing us with this platform. So our next session is on the Gandhi Jayanti, 2nd of October. We'll be sharing that on Gandhi Jayanti. We have speakers are going to be Honorable Justice Muralidhar and Meenakshi Arora, senior advocate. And the topic is forging their own path. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Pratibha. Thank you.